Hello, I've been running, and the name David Boothman popped into my head. Who is David Boothman?
I would like to know. I look in the mirror every day and I ask, who is this creature? But I am an artist for a long time. I'm not the artist that is popularly depicted or represented. At an early age in high school, being an artist was a very noble thing to be. It represents a certain quality of human existence and experience. So even at that age, people who were artists had impressed me, and from Rumi to Khalid Gibran to musicians like Eddie Palmieri and our local musicians like Fitzroy Coleman and Edmundo Ross. I'm a romantic, let's put it that way. So with this whole popularity and broadcasting in the media, sometimes they create this idea of arts industry in a particular way and to make money, and they expound in a way that what an artist is, and it feeds a certain kind of egotism. And to me, an artist is on the other side of egotism in a way, because true artist to me is almost close to a mystic, because we feed from some inner calling. And in my understanding, I think the human capacity is twofold. One is angelic and one is brute. And the angelic is from an inner, non-egotist nature that feeds our individuality. On the other side, we have the brute that feeds the personality and kind of the brute side of us. Recently, I wrote the two behavior patterns in life, and one is ionic and one is covalent. And the ionic feeds on the me gene, the I gene. And you find capitalism right on this me gene, because it's self-serving, it's self-interest, it's self-everything. And on the other side is a sharing idea. I don't know if I should venture into this, but it adds to my flavor of value. And I think these two basic attitude has been with us for a long time in Egyptian days, that the equivalent, the sun was considered as a God concept, because the sun shares, they don't receive. So all the symbolism of deity was represented by the sun of sharing. On the other hand, the ionic side, which is a little more gross, is a part of us of survival and stuff. So there is, to me, a balance of the two, because the two is necessary. One, if it's 5-5, it will cancel each other. So the balance is really 5-4, and the covalent is 5, and the ionic is 4. Because in the construction of everything, and they have the divine mean. But today, the ionic surpassed equivalent, and the ratio is 7-2, and that's why we have all this confusion, because and I use this measurement in everything in health and the situational thing we have fall in, because when we say we are descending into matter, that is exactly what it is. The ionic represents that matter.
How is this impacting the artist?
We talk about growth, huh? So commerciality and all these things push grossness, especially coming from the West. The first people had a balance of that ecology. And since the days of Genghis Khan, they knew the West was coming. Everybody knew the West was coming. And here we are today. And the West, to me, represents a human tendency that is tied into the gross, the ionic side. That's why the capitalism reigns. And you have all the great writers of Karl Marx warning about this disposition of thing. Part of this, people who do the could write and come from a covalent mean in terms of that inner spirit. I think from my perspective as an artist that deals with perception, perspective, history, symbolism, and language, we represent a memory of our first causal relationship. From time to time, we get a little insight of it in the midst of all the confusion of the ionic construct. I don't know if I'm too abstract here. My understanding that Africa was a cradle of humanity. And of course, they had some kind of climate change and there were migration all over. All the classical cultures of the world, regardless if it's Asian, African, Indian, they all have the 7 liberal arts. And if they all have the 7, there's something to it. So that means wherever it is that they are gone, is the 7 liberal arts keep the memory of the divine. So there are immutable laws inside of the 7 liberal arts. The 7 liberal arts is geometry, maths, music, rhetoric, logic, astronomy. Inside of all of these things, there are principles that guide us in terms of measure of this divine presence. And we all have that. The Chinese have music. They have astronomy that have them survived and venture into different agri-science to live by in terms of they worked out all the stars and relationship of the planets and the season and into the healing and the pharmaceutical and healing and stuff like that. Those things come from an intelligence. It's not a Western science. Western science change it eventually. But these are innate first people inscripted thing in our DNA. An artist, from time to time, because of their conditionality, reflect on that from their own nature and bring it back out as little truth and gifts to society, where as what you call the masses, which still on the growth side, are blessed with certain people or certain groups of societies that have this lie and share this thing. So if you have a democracy, they have a saying that the voice populi vox, it shows that the gross is more meaningful because it's more in command and demand. And if in a democracy you have 70%, don't say that a term I use for people who don't have any kind of heart rendering or mindfulness, it becomes imbalanced, and that's what we are today. So the other 30 of conscious, covalent thinking is suppressed, and hence we have this domination. Now, there's a difference between dominant and domination. It's good because in the mathematical ratio, dominant is good because even minorities could be dominant or vice versa. But when it dominates, it tends to be rape, war, pillage, and the crude side of the ionic side. So that's a kind of a real abstract idea that it's where art meets science, where spirituality meets certain science is inside of that. We benefit from it from time to time with people who see and who could relate those things in a particular way. Now, in terms of culture, the idea of the color red, I'm an artist, and I study colors, and colors have a particular reality. What would be red for someone would see red, but they don't really see red because they don't understand what red is. Red have a lot of different abstract things on it. It represents life, it represents love, the Orisha, Shango's red, and they are associated with what red is. But if you look at when you don't understand red, you are illiterate. And that goes with even what culture is. we look at culture, we talk about culture, we say culture is big culture and stuff, but you don't know what culture is. So there's an illiteracy with a big mouth, which is on the Irish side, talking about culture. And after 40, 50 years, saying it for what it is, it becomes. Because what you utter becomes real. That's our human magical reality. So if we utter a certain kind of darkness or opaqueness, it becomes that.
Could you describe what is culture?
That's as red is. You might be cultured to think. Culture is, it could be from an individual to a collective. And we might have a collective agreement on something that is true to this color. And after time, collective absorbent becomes culture. If your culture or music become noise because you don't understand music and you follow music in a way that some Western situation, if we are dominated by a media that is illiterate and is a highness and it influences what society is. And that is an aspect of a culture development. Now, in Trinidad, and I'm pushing this idea, when you have a ministry that is in economic-based idea, when you have when it crosses with culture, you do the anthropological relationship to it, we understand things in a particular way. But if the economic base is determining what that is, and as a product, and you have a very amateur relationship to what is a cultural product, and we jump into it in a particular way, then we sell a premature idea of ourselves and probably sell the brute side of ourselves. We don't understand the equivalent side of ourselves. And I think my generation had a blind because we had the tools. We come from a romantic movement saying, I am my grandfather's grandson. And that says to, what that means, I'm in the tradition of the intention of what was before me. Now, part of the American, especially influence in the world and the domination, they said, invest in the youth. I don't see no problem with that, but when they do that for a particular reason, because they say, let the youth tell the story. So a lot of money has been into that. You find music, TT, everything is youth. And my question is, what a story a 15-year-old to 20-year-old could tell. And in my understanding, first people understands that when you reach a certain age in the 60s and being an elder, you now know something, so you give back. So the first people invest in the elders, whereas you have this ionic capitalists to invest in youth, because what they're doing, they're creating a gullibility, and a gullibility is a market. And the market is just for money oriented. So it goes back into this ionic space, this dominant space. So I put those things in that kind of measurement and explaining those two basic behavior patterns. And they are behavior patterns, and they are tendencies. So I'm not saying something is. So I would not say you are because you are becoming something. So if I hold you to this level, I'm doing you a disservice. I have to watch your tendencies to really be clear and be honest with it.
Given what you've just described, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing artists today?
An industry that don't understand itself, an industry that get caught up into a certain downside. The same America we talk about was presented as high art, and the people who were part of that, they were at one time in the 40s and 50s termed communists. Some of them had to go to Europe. These are jazz artists. And the jazz artists at that time fell into the Bauhaus kind of reality where you're discovering the same liberal arts entwining inside of each interdisciplinary idea. So a person who's an architect, like even Clive Zander, would say that architect is frozen music, and he is right. And his mentor was Glenn Chase, who was a Bauhaus architect and artist. Now, I founded the Caribbean Renaissance Foundation with the idea of how to start a decolonization process. And what I just mentioned leads to that process in understanding what we were told and how we were taught. We have to rethink, and in rethinking, reorganize and reinvent who we are, especially in the Caribbean. Now, the idea of when people ask, what is Renaissance? They think of European, but Renaissance come in all different from Africa, Chinese Renaissance. And what the Renaissance is, sometimes there's a lull where things is inertia in society, in all the classical. And these same grouping of people who are attuned to this pre-science, this divine calling, raise, and then it shapes the society to go that way. That is a Renaissance. So when in European side, all the Renaissance artists, it was the artists, it was not the whole mass, it was the artists who changed. So we have to understand that from that perspective. The Caribbean Renaissance, on the other hand, is we are the last grouping of world people that could shape ourselves. We have the tools to shape ourselves and go and really endorse the first people science and bring it forward. Whereas the other cultures have been saturated with this Western or whatever it is. So if you put those things together, we have a role to play in the emerging cosmic order of the planet. That's how I look at it.
And what is our role in the Caribbean, in our small islands?
Trinidad's supposed to be the lead, but cannot be because we have a very ionic disposition. We think we are better than all the islands. Yet still we have all the islands in us. My grandfather was Bajan, my grandmother is Martinican, and on the other side is Venezuela. So we have to work on diffusing this colonized thinking and really understand our place in it. Government is just people, and people could be making mistakes for a long time. And if you make mistakes, so after 20, 30 years, it becomes again. That's a rule of thumb. And coming back to our carnival, on another level, conscious level, I think, and I will say it loud, the Kiddies Carnival, it's supposed to be the most sacred, beautiful thing when you see the kids, the young. When I look in their eyes, I see two things. I see a sense of appeasement and a sense of humiliation. The appeasement is trying to appease their parents to be part of a culture, which they're pulling them into this noise. And a literate DJ talking down to them. And we call that culture. And the humiliation is, why me in this part? But they don't see that because they don't understand. Again, they don't see beyond. And it's worse than Netanyahu bombing an innocent Palestine child. And it is serious. And we do look at it as we culture and you want to sell that to the world. I'm serious about that. When you talk about activism, it's not a fad. As an artist, you have to understand these things and act on it. So
you've just thrown a big stone.
I know You spelled mango at one time.
I would love for you to talk a little more about the Kiddies Carnival and its impact on our children and how can it shape our future?
I don't know if it's important to be conscious first. And even our media is dropped so low, we're into the noise. People broadcasting without writing, which is an irresponsibility because you should write out your intention. You can't wing things. if you're responsible, you write your intentions. For the longest while, we open our media. And then the worst thing, you have the media buy into that, corporate buy into that because it sells whatever it is they're selling. They go into massive stores and you hear this noise. You have these soca artists who have been led to think it is a national thing. And my peeve is since our independence, we perceive our culture through a narrow aperture, and we never open it out for inclusion. We stayed on recess. We didn't go back to class to understand where we are going. So we are just carrying on without full study of ourselves. Getting back to the Kiddies Carnival, in my day when we had antique things and they had the Kiddies Carnival, the music was different. The artist was different. The technology was different. It had a little distortion, but it was not loud. It was not gross. So all of a sudden, the technology jumps, and a lot of people became DJs, and they don't understand. And we became louder because to be loud is to be powerful. Replication is not a creative thing. People say it's innovative, but it has no originality. You just continue the recycled idea. I'm very concerned about that. For instance, when a DJ play an MP3, like a photo with low res, when you start to open it up, it pixelates. So when you play an MP3 with low res out of volume, it distorts. And after time, that becomes our aesthetic. It's sad to say all the events have the same recurrence. We're not creative at all. All the events have the same behavior pattern. And the noise, the selfies, and the romance has gone out. We are a romantic culture because we liked our Spanish stations coming through, the airwaves. The Spanish culture is a very romantic culture, and we was more Spanish than we were British. So we have to fix those things. And the other thing too is coming back to the idea of decolonization. The French and the Spanish cultures had conservatories over 300 years. So they were part of a universal relation to the same seven liberal arts, which is inside of universities. The Anglo-Saxon Caribbean is just about 75 years old. So when I was doing something in Cuba for the Norman Govan conference, and I was preparing the people for the Renaissance, I did some research. There was so much women writers 200, 100 and something years ago that we don't hear about writing on this decolonization. And my thing is, if there were this kind of consciousness and there was a resonance of this type of thinking, it shows that there was a consciousness. India captured that and related it into different kinds of sciences, but we have to do that. It shows that there was these things was alive. So the important is when you look at filmmaking and art production is relative to capturing those things and bringing it forward.
As we bring this session to an end, David, tell me, what would you like us to take away?
Our society, especially the elders who we forget to have programs for them, so their life is more meaningful, and the youth could absorb some of the elder stuff. And that is a conscious way of being, not what you are fed by empirical ionic capitalists who would take your money, take your soul away, and we buy into that unconsciously. So we have to be a little more conscious, discerning, and celebrate those people who are really artists, not the fledgling ones.
Thank you very much, David, and we look forward to your continued work.
Renaissance, Caribbean Renaissance is very important at this time.